Welcome again, joining us for another session of farm management during uncertain times. Today's topic is on crop marketing strategies during a drought. And today we have with us Dr. Aaron Smith. He is an associate professor in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics, as well as our crop extension specialist for the University of Tennessee. So Aaron, I know there's really a lot to dive into this today, so we'll just kind of jump right in it. When we look across the state of Tennessee, there's a lot of variability across the state as far as what it took cost-wise to get this year's crops into the ground. But then now, as this year has played out even more, there's going to be a tremendous difference in yield potential across the state, even potentially yield differences for a single producer. So with us just kind of jumping right into this, right now, we're not right at harvest season yet, but it's coming up on us. What should producers be doing or considering right now as we look ahead to harvest season and estimating that potential revenue for these crops this year?
Yeah, this is been one of the most challenging years I've seen since I've been in Tennessee the last 10 years in terms of really getting a handle on cost of production and then yield across the state. When we think back at how this year started, we obviously had tremendously high input prices. We had availability issues. We had tremendous movements in input prices and output prices, and so it's been a really difficult time period from where we started out planning this crop in the winter, looking at budgets. We've seen prices kind of all over the place. And just as an example, when we started looking at doing our crop budgets, we were seeing estimated cost of production for an acre of corn anywhere between $700 an acre up to well over $1,000 an acre, which is a tremendous increase year over year. But the variability is just all over the place. And so when we look at our current circumstances, one thing that's really important to look at is how much do we have invested in that crop. We maybe budgeted certain things that didn't get put out, or maybe we didn't end up incurring those costs. So what we really want to find out is where are we at in terms of what our investment is in this crop, regardless of what it looks like in terms of a yield and a price standpoint. First step is to kind of take a look at what is that investment that you have to date, and then what's the amount of money that's going to be needed to bring that crop to market or to termination. And so looking at that, I think is the first step. I think the next step is to really go field by field and look at that yield potential, because we're going to have yields all over the place. In general, because of the drought in West Tennessee, some places are really hard hit. It'll be anywhere between 0 maybe to 170 bushels, maybe some fields a little bit more than that if they got a timely rain. But we're going to see tremendous yield variation. And so one of the things I always encourage people to look at is look field by field, or more specifically insured unit by insured unit, because we really want to look and see what's going to get coverage from our crop insurance versus what we might end up having to end up looking at in terms of, okay, we are just going to have to rely on market forces in order to get revenue from that field. So those are the first two things I would do, is look at that cost of production, see what's invested, see what it's going to take to finish out the year. Then next step, take a look and see what is my reasonable yield estimates moving forward.
And I think you hit kind of the nail on the head right there, that this is going to be so dependent on producer by producer. It's varies so much across the state. I think there was a drought monitor that was just released. Potentially 22% of just Tennessee is in severe drought right now. So we may talk to a producer that's being impacted by this, where other parts of the state may have received those rains. So there's a lot of variability in that yield potential that's going to happen. And I kind of want to shift gears on that discussion now to shift towards maybe potential for crop insurance payments to be triggered. What do producers need to be thinking about with their crop insurance policies when it comes to marketing this crop?
Yeah, the very first thing that I will say, I mean, and you're spot on in terms of yield variability in general, and I always hate generalization. Well, in general, what we've seen is from east to west, we've had more timely rains in the east than the west. But again, it's very, very sporadic. So when we're talking about crop insurance, the first thing that I would suggest is you have to have consistent and constant communication with your crop insurance representative. Make sure you understand the different issues that are affecting your crop. what some of your alternatives might be in terms of potentially using it as a forage or terminating the crop. You want to make sure that everything is done by the book so that you don't inadvertently make yourself uneligible for some of the indemnity payments that you might otherwise end up receiving. The next step when we look at crop insurance is to kind of look and see where that base level of coverage is per insured unit. So if we think back, and it seems like an eternity ago when we had that projected price established for corn, for example, it was $5.90 a bushel for Tennessee. So kind of getting an idea of what that revenue guarantee or yield guarantee was for each insured unit. And then kind of looking back and saying, okay, well, based on what the current market is offering, what's that trigger yield, or what yield does your crop have to result in under the current market prices for you to start receiving indemnity payments? And that'll really give you an understanding of where you are relative to your crop insurance guarantee and what some potential scenarios are in terms of an indemnity payments versus what you can expect in terms of market returns.
So now that we've kind of looked at that baseline that we need to consider, what about when they're thinking about those pre-harvest sales?
Yeah, that's another one that needs to be factored in there when you think about it. There's numerous ways to price a crop before harvest. Some of it involves either a short hedge or forward contracting options. All of them are going to be slightly different and depending on how they're utilized. What you really want to look at for forward contracting, for example, is to look and see where your production is relative to how much you have priced. Because all of a sudden, if you have more price than what you're going to have in estimated production, you have to evaluate what the options are available to you to exit those forward priced contracts when you are looking at having a production deficit. So that needs to be factored in there as well. And then also looking, okay, I've got this much forward price. I was projecting or anticipating back in at planting, getting say 175 bushels per acre, but I'm only going to end up with 100 bushels per acre. That's a big difference in what our marketing strategy will look like. So to me, it's kind of a three-pronged approach. You have to know where you're at right now. You have to understand what your crop insurance is going to cover, and then what your pre-sales look like. And then after that, build that plan out to move forward to finish off that crop year in terms of revenue projections.
So I guess one final question, is there any other considerations that producers right now need to take into question when they're thinking about marketing this crop for this year, such as storage or basis, anything like that they need to take into account?
Yeah, a couple of real quick ones. I mean, obviously, depending on how hard the drought has hit the crop, forage feed might be something that you have to look at for corn crop rather than harvesting it for grain. So that's got to be a consideration. The other big one that can rear its ugly head is quality concerns and dockage, particularly with mycotoxins, alpha toxins, probably going to be an issue for many producers. That can affect it a couple of different ways in terms of being able to deliver to elevators and fulfill those contracts. And so we want to be careful with that. Option strategies is something that people can look forward or look at as a method to end up marketing some additional crop or participating in market rallies if you don't have storage. I think each farm needs to evaluate what they can store through the remainder of the marketing year. So if you look from harvest all the way to May, for example, see what you have available in storage and what kind of your marketing plan is going to look like. Obviously, because of the reduced size of the crop, we'll likely be able to store a good chunk of this crop. And that should factor into our basis decisions, because one thing that we might end up seeing, because we're going to have certain areas of Tennessee where we're going to have much lower production, is we could see a much stronger basis in several locations. So we want to factor that into, can we store that crop? Can we take advantage for the production that we do have for a basis appreciation once we exit that harvest window? So looking at maybe establishing some basis prices in January through March, where maybe we can get a little bit more attractive terms and conditions.
And you brought up one really good point that I kind of want to fall back on, is that forage and feed option right now. There's a lot of people that are considering silage or baleage right now with their crops if they are in that very poor yield estimates at the point. And so But those are things that we've got to continually check on: nitrates, make sure that it's a quality feed, and also make sure that demand is there. Talk to your crop insurance agent about that, but also make sure the demand is there before you just cut it for silage or baleage.
Yeah, and you know that's a great point. I mean, we do have to be cognizant of the quality of the feed. We also have to be very careful with, like you said, you have to know the local market conditions for the demand for that feed, because you can actually run yourself into a set of circumstances where, okay, I am going to sell this for feed, but if there's no demand and you already incurred those costs, you're going back even faster.
Yep.
And so again, setting up that market with the understanding of, this is the quality of feed I've got. Is there a buyer in my area that I can end up selling this to and generating at least a little bit of income? And then, of course, long before these conversations happen, make sure the crop insurance agent has given the okay to proceed with that plan of action, because we really want to make sure that everything is done by the books with the crop insurance agents to avoid any unforeseen issues that would affect your indemnity payments.
So after our kind of discussion right here, I think maybe there's potentially 3 takeaways from this, and feel free to add more if I've gone off the path here. But number 1 is know your cost of production. Make sure that you really know what you put into that crop for this year and what's going to go into it for harvest season. Second one is have that range for yield estimates. Don't just base it off of one potential yield. And then the next one is talk to your crop insurance agent. Keep them in the loop, communicate with them at all times. Would you say those were the top 3?
Yeah, and the fourth one I would add to that is just know your position within the market and what the path is forward in terms of pricing, storage, and basis. I think that'll be something that will do very well. Now, one thing I will say is it will take some work, and the only way to really get to that number is to put pencil to paper, so to speak, to find out where you're sitting on an individual field, individual insured unit, and as an operation as a whole. So, you know, running those numbers, I know that's not necessarily something that everybody enjoys, but it's really imperative under these circumstances to know where you're positioned.
Yep, and it's imperative to do it producer by producer. Just don't go off of what others are saying at this moment, because it's very dependent on each producer. But Dr. Smith, thank you so much for joining us again. Dr. Aaron Smith is an associate professor in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics at UT. He's also our crop extension specialist. I'm Tori Marshall. I'm a farm management area specialist out in West Tennessee. If you have any questions for us, please feel free to reach out to us at any time. Go and watch our other videos in this library of farm management during uncertain times. We've got some, we talked about that feed and forage. That's a video that will be up as well. Considerations for corn and soybeans during a drought as silage. So please go and watch those videos. And Dr. Smith, we thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.